And we're back. This is Woodworking is Bullshit, a podcast about creativity, art, design, philosophy, and as it were, cutting board safety. I'm your host, Paul Jasper, scientist by day, woodworker by night, and I'm joined with my co-host, Eric Curtis, fine furniture maker and content creator.
Are you, time out, hold on, real quick question. Did you, because you broke the fucking folding chair last week, did you bring back the fucking squeaky chair? Did I hear that thing squeak? You son of a bitch. This is an audio format, Paul.
I'm going to try to move as little as possible. And thanks for fucking breaking up my introduction. I was doing great, and you totally side railed.
You nailed it. Carry on.
Is there any video to this? Could they see you dancing?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, there's video.
Oh, great. Fantastic.
Yeah, those were good dance moves, too.
So you might have heard a voice that does not belong to one married to Sai. We have a very special guest today. Our guest is what I would like to call multidisciplinary. Wood turner, sculptor, science fiction author, and last but not certainly least, professor of wood anatomy at Oregon State University, Dr. Seri Robinson. Seri, thank you so much for being on the podcast tonight.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This should be a lot of fun.
Well, so maybe I could start with why we thought to have you on. So recently you recorded a podcast episode on Shop Talk Live with Ben and Amanda for Fun Woodworking. And it was an excellent episode. And of course I listened to it, but I hadn't listened to it. I hadn't seen it myself, but so many of my friends had reached out to me because you hit some serious nerves with this. They were reaching out to me to see, they were saying, what do you think of this? Is this true? Can you believe
think I was lying?
It's hilarious. People were so bent out of shape from some of the things you said. So they wanted to.
I watched the forums. I watched people explode,
Man.
like real time.
Paul, what were some of the things that people were bent out of shape about?
Oh, they were.
Or are we going to get into that later?
We're going to get into it. But okay. They were reaching out to me as their scientist friend to be like, is this true? Do you know her? Can you validate any of this?
Is this dual scientists know each other?
And I said,
Small group.
No, actually, we didn't know each other. And I said, not only is she telling the truth about these things, of course, but I think we should take it a step further. In this episode, what we want to do is reiterate the important points you talked about in case anyone didn't see that. But really, the goal of today's conversation is to take the next step. And what that means is more details about it. We want to also go an additional step about quantification, right? It's not about yes or no, black and white. It's really about quantifying the dose and quantifying the risk in some way. And I don't mean like, hazard ratio of 0.25. I mean, we have to put this in terms that people can understand. And that's the goal for today. And we also have a question and answer. So I do want to say, rarely do you get two scientists who do woodworking and have two PhDs and who love wood as much as me and Seri do. Like, we love wood and love woodworking. It's the most amazing substance. Rarely do we come together in the same moment to dissect and talk about three topics today: cutting board safety, wood allergy development, and cancer risk due to wood dust. So those are going to be the three main topics we're going to talk today. So
It's really heavy.
Well,
Yeah, we're going to try to break it up with a lot of profanity and jokes.
Yeah, definitely.
it's heavy, but I think our audience knows that, that'll
take it off the rails. Yeah.
that Eric is the chaos that keeps things light. So, Seri, maybe you could start by introducing a little bit about your background, what your lab works on, and what your interests are scientifically.
Okay, so I'm a professor at Oregon State University. I have an undergraduate degree in woodworking, which is in the art and design field, and a master's and Ph.D. in forest science with specialization in wood science. I'm a professor of wood anatomy, which means that I do things like wood identification professionally. So I do a whole bunch of things, but I end up as like expert witness in court cases, and I do wood ID for like insurance companies and people who are trying to hold their insurance company to pay them money and all that kind of stuff.
Hold on.
Already a question. I'm not even done.
I don't want to interrupt you, but you're just gonna breeze over like expert witness in court cases.
I mean, did you have specific questions? Yeah.
I have never been one of those. What and in what court case has wood science required?
All the time. All the time.
Really?
So it's so common. And not just like there's so many different ways wood ends up in court, right? It can be as simple, these are the most common, is just like homeowners or builders who have been like lied to about a supplier or something like that, and they go to court. There's a lot of like builders that maybe didn't put a vapor barrier in correctly, and then someone has to come up do like a mold and decay, because my specialization is how wood decay fungi interact with wood anatomy, because I work in an ancient art form known as spalting, which is actually what I study. Like I've always been the art side of wood. It's just this really old art form of spalting has a lot of applications for modern science. And so I end up getting sucked into other things because a lot of people are used to basidiomycete fungi, which are like the traditional wood decay fungi, being a problem. But like lots of the quote unquote mold fungi also decay wood. And those are those soft rotting fungi are my specialty. Like they're my babies. And so if you need someone to deal with like the fungi that turn wood neon pink that may also be, eating your, utility poles or whatever. That's me. So I do a lot of that. Sometimes it's homicide, and it like sometimes telephone poles fall on people, and then like who's to blame? Like someone was supposed to inspect the pole and didn't inspect the pole right, and sometimes, and this is always like it's fun but also kind of sad. It's like little old ladies who have old houses and want their floor to match or want their deck to match or something like that. And they'll get a company, and it's always like they're usually pretty wealthy. I want this like ancient whatever teak floor, and I want it to also the new stuff to be teak. And then the builders come in, they're like, okay, this is the same thing. And then the old lady's like, it doesn't even look the same.
Not teak.
So I get a lot of those, even like pre-trial type of stuff where she like wants to just like settle it. There are a lot of places that will do wood identification on the cheap, like send away type of stuff, but they don't really do the deep science. So our lab is I already tried all the cheap places and I didn't like the answer they gave me. Do you want to like be the authority? And so, because my lab charges a lot, but you get like this thick report with like microscope slides and like way too much information, like little arrows that are like, we know it's not this wood species because as you can see here, the scleriform perforation plates are blah, blah, blah. And everyone's just like,
that's exactly what I was thinking. I was already on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Eric, how are you? Sorry.
Scleriform. I was working on those during leg day the other day. I didn't mean to derail. Oh my God. Tell her what you want to do. That's what I do on this podcast though. So carry on.
I work with wood and fungus, and I have a passion maybe not a passion for now, but I get sucked into a lot of what is dangerous, what is safe, because of the misinformation about fungi in particular, and how like terrified people are of fungi and not understanding it's a kingdom and all of that kind of stuff. And so that just kind of cycles into, because people would always be like, oh, I'm afraid of spalted wood, which is, when fungus is on wood and turns it pretty colors. And I'd be like, no, it's not the fungus you need to be afraid of. It's the wood, which then cycles into, why should I be afraid of wood? And I'm like, well, let me tell you all the reasons you should be afraid of wood. And then it's just
let me list the reasons.
Yeah, this whole thing.
Amazing. Well, sorry. Okay, so go ahead, Paul.
Well, I just want to say, to have someone with your background on I guess a mechanism like this or a podcast or anything is super rare. So we appreciate it. In addition, so I thought I would, I always say I'm a scientist by day, but I never say what I do. But I think maybe now is the time because we'll be talking science today. So my background is I have a Ph.D. in immunology and microbiology. So that is the study of the immune system and the study of bacteria and viruses. Um, I did after my PhD and my postdoc. I've been in the scientific field in pharmaceutical science now for 17 years, and it's still my full-time job. And I of course, I still do a lot of immunology, like allergies and autoimmunity, but a lot of cancer risk. So today you'll hear some of allergy talk, you'll hear some microbiology talk, and you'll hear some cancer risk talk. And I think between Seri and myself, we should be able to at least take a stab at speaking to these things intelligently. Let's hope we can. So that's who we are. And that I think it's super rare to have two of us at the same time, which is awesome. I'm so excited. I was looking forward to this episode for weeks and weeks and weeks. So like I said, 3 topics today: cutting board safety, wood allergies, and wood cancer dust risk. Now, Eric wanted to start off with a question.
Yeah, so I mean, listen, Sarah, I've been a professional woodworker for 12, 13 years at this point, and early on,
How every post that is going to go off the rails on a forum starts. So
I believe, yeah, yes. The difference is, I understand that your opinion and research is valuable, and I'm genuinely curious about what you're going to say, because you're a much smarter person than I am. So what I was going to say was, we all start off making cutting boards, right? Like it's simple. You glue things up, you put it out for sale when you're trying to sell like your shitty furniture at a furniture show or a craft fair, and you just hoping that somebody comes by and gives you, $30-$40 for a piece of wood because you have bills to pay and you want to eat at the end of the week. So I have long been on the train of using wooden cutting boards. And a few years ago, I was doing a thing down in Atlanta and was sharing a house with a couple other folks, and we had only wood cutting boards in the house. And they asked me specifically to make sure that I had a cutting board designated for cutting meat on, rather than using the wood cutting boards for the vegetables. And I was the person in the house saying, like, no, there's science behind it that says wood is actually better for cutting meat on than plastic. But because I'm not a smart person with a Ph.D. after my name, they were like, you fucking build shit out of wood, of course you're biased. So why is it that I shouldn't be afraid to cut raw meat or vegetables with contamination on a wooden cutting board?
Okay, so I want to start off by saying that the science I'm about to talk about now is not mine. So you can send your hate mail somewhere else. I am going to talk, however, about the 20 to 30 years of scientific papers on this, that if you go to Google Scholar, which is a different side of Google, and you just put in cutting board, wood, and bacteria, you can find them all. Most of them aren't even paywalled. And there has been study after study after study that talks about how there's no problems using raw meat on wood cutting boards. And that's because wood is hygroscopic, right? So it's constantly, and all woodworkers know this, right? You know that when the air is humid, your wood swells. And when the air is dry, your wood can shrink and crack. And if you get wood wet, it can also swell. So what it's doing is it wants to equilibrate. So if you dump a cup of water on the surface of wood, it dries, quote unquote dries pretty quick. But what it's doing is the wood is equilibrating the water throughout. So it doesn't want a big wet spot in the center. It's dead. We're going to anthropomorphize it. Stick with me. It doesn't want a big wet spot, right? And so that water distributes evenly throughout the board. And study after study after study. Yeah.
Sorry, is that capillary action?
There's a couple of things going on.
Okay. I'm just curious. Go ahead.
Yeah. Part of it is. And so what happens is, and again, lots of studies have done this, if you thick meat, raw meat on the cutting board, and if it's juicy, it's just going to start pulling the blood down into or whatever's on it. But the thing is, excuse me, I'm having some carbonated beverages right now. And so, an audio podcast, that should be really fun. It's safe space. It's going to burp. So the idea is, you wash it, but there's bacteria on the surface, and the bacteria is in the water, and as the water gets pulled down into the wood, the bacteria gets pulled down into the wood, and the surface remains perpetually clean. And this is a very fast action.
Oh,
and so this is important
really? How fast?
to talk about.
How fast? Like, how fast are we talking? Is it minutes fast?
Yes, it's well under an hour. So in our testing we did with finishes on the unfinished wood, it was under a minute. It was just like an instantaneous for a lot of them. And so that means that it's like perpetually cleaning. If it's wet, right? If it's dry, if it's dry, it's probably irrelevant anyway. So you can rinse it. You don't even need to use soap. You can, and I would say do use soap just because it moves the fats off a lot better, but you don't need soap because you just need water to pull it down. And then you give it time. It needs to equilibrate. And then, in 24 to 48 hours, you can be sure everything is locked down. It doesn't come back out. There have been studies on that. There have been studies where they cut the cutting boards apart and tried to re-isolate from the center of the board, but it just dies because without water, it dies.
So is that the thing so I know you've said in the article that you wrote for Fine Woodworking that it's antimicrobial because it gets pulled down into the center and then it dies. But what is the actual mechanism that's killing it? I assume that a cutting board being made of dead wood doesn't have autoimmune system.
Desiccation.
It's just desiccation. Yeah, it dries up. And even things
So
like
no food source.
Food source, So when we did testing, it was with salmonella and listeria, and salmonella dies pretty quickly on surfaces regardless, right? It's a very it has to be actively growing in order to function. So it's really interesting to if you look really carefully at the data, this is a very this is a thing that only really matters so much if you are working with meat or vegetables that might have contamination. Right, like lettuces and things like that tend to have a higher E. coli and stuff load, because salmonella kind of dies on its own. And so it's true that if you were just dealing with something with salmonella and you just walked away from your plastic cutting board, if it dried out, chances are the salmonella might not fare so well regardless. So what we're talking about here is a really interesting action that happens that means it helps decrease the cross-contamination issue. So you don't have to freak out about vegetables and meats and moving things around. Your steak board can be your carrot board, can be your bread board, because of that quick movement as long as it's wet.
And Sarah, you made a good point on the other podcast that you said, listen, meat's not the only thing with bacteria on it. Your vegetables have plenty of bacteria on them. So it's sort of misguided that the meat's dirty and the vegetables are clean necessarily, yeah?
We keep seeing recalls on all these vegetables, right? Constantly for all this different bacteria. And so I'm but definitely be concerned about the meat on your cutting boards. That's the problem.
So it sounds to me like what you said was the imperative part, the important part is that the cutting board has some moisture on it, whether from the material or from just rinsing off in the sink, in order to allow the hydroscopic action to pull the bacteria into the center of the board.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay.
And so you dispelled one myth that I heard commonly I would tell people the same message 10 years ago at the Furniture Institute when I was teaching a cutting board class. I would tell them this research. And one of the questions was, well, doesn't it get pulled down and then doesn't it proliferate inside the board? And it's no. It dries out, desiccates, like you said, and there's no food source for it. And so that's an important myth that I think you busted. One thing you said that really I wanted you to elaborate on is you said washing with soap doesn't really do much. And I always think of soap, as a microbiology immunologist, soap mechanically disrupts membranes of bacteria, right? It is antibacterial by definition. So why doesn't soap help with this?
It's because usually by the time you get around to soaping it, a lot of it's already been pulled out. And so it doesn't hurt anything. It doesn't hurt to use soap. The soap really helped if you got if you've been working with ground hamburger or something that's really fatty and there's a fat layer on your board, that's going to do the same thing a finish will, right? Which we'll talk about in a minute. So you want to get that oil layer off. But if you've just been chopping vegetables or something that's not real oily, the water works so fast that the soap, again, this is not my research, so don't send me hate mail on it. But there has been testing about soap versus no soap, and there's no statistical difference. So, like, if soap makes you feel better, so
when you say no statistical difference, I think what you're referring to, tell me if I'm wrong, what you're referring to is that the number of bacterial colonies that came back up off the surface was not different.
yep, it was just the same,
Okay.
regardless soap versus no soap.
All right. How about, so I was thinking about the pulling of the water and the bacteria with it off the cutting surface. All of us woodworkers tend to think, well, I'm speaking for a lot of us, maybe not all of us, that end grain, because of its orientation, tends to pull in more fluid faster than, say, face grain or side grain. Is that true, and does it matter for the cutting board, do you think?
Add some paper. It did draw you a picture.
Well, you also have to speak it because it's an audio podcast as well.
Yes. But also, who doesn't want poorly drawn 2D stuff then explained to them?
Oh, that's the best.
Yeah.
You are going to have to sign it so that we can sell it, though. That is.
Oh, wow. You're not going to get any. The only reason I passed illustration in art school was because I hurt my hand and had to use my non-dominant hand. And they thought that was the reason, but I was bad.
Sarah, are you going to tell me that the rays make for like side grain that
You better believe it.
Yeah, you're going to tell me.
Is it really?
Yeah, so
really the rays?
Well, I'm going to let Sari expound on this, but I'll while she's drawing, I'll just, fill the space. We always think of it as a bundle of straws, but that's not exactly accurate. With perpendicular to the straws, if the straws are running up and down, perpendicular to that sideways are other channels and other, sure, as rays.
All right.
And so, go ahead.
Behold the art that I have drawn for you. This is wood. It's incredible. For those of you listening on the audio, this looks like nothing. This looks like some toilet paper tubes stacked on top of each other lengthwise, and then some coffee stirrers going at 90 degrees to the toilet paper tubes. And that's what wood is. It's toilet paper tubes. Hey, they're made out of wood in the end, right? And then coffee stirrers going the other way. Okay, so here's the deal. Everyone always talks about end grain, right? Because they're thinking, right, that the highway of wood is mostly up and down. And they're not. That's wrong. It is more true for woods that are ring porous. In woodworking, they call them open grain, which is a misnomer. We're not going to use that because we're better than that. Ring porous. And so the ones that have big early wood and little late wood, like oaks and elms and ashes, have really big vessels, really big toilet paper tubes, and they can move stuff really fast. But there's lots of woods, like maples and beeches, where all the toilet paper tubes are tiny and the same size. And it just doesn't really matter. But there are rays, right? Not all the cells in wood go up and down. A significant portion of them actually move in and out. They move radially. And those conduct very well as well. And in fact, all of these things conduct because, here's a fun little edit. You're going to hear this as I go.
Oh, you poke holes through the whole thing. Oh, I love it.
You just turned it into a 3-dimensional drawing.
Yeah.
There are pits because things have to diffuse between the cells as well, right? So all of these different cells have holes in them that allow for more conduction throughout.
So it's far more. Yeah, I see. It's far more porous than simply like end grain is the big straws, right?
Yep. No, it water moves every possible which way. Now, does it move ever so slightly faster through the end grain on some species? Yes, it does. Not on softwoods, mind you, on hardwoods. But also, no one makes end grain cutting boards, as far as I know, that are just the wood cookie. They're always glue ups. And so now we start getting into why we don't like finishes on cutting boards and why we don't want to use glue ups, because in order for wood to work and be hygroscopic, it has to be able to diffuse moisture. And so what is glue? Glue absorbs into the wood, blocks up all the cells, and holds the wood together. So if you stick glue in your wood, you've just lost part of your highway. It's like filling that highway in with cement. And what are end grain cutting boards? Lots and lots of tiny little end grain pieces glued up. So your board is like 50% glue. And so your highways are just, they're not nearly as functional. So any benefit you might have gotten from that orientation is really not down with the amount of glue you have.
Well,
And the same
at least on the
happens with
seams,
finish.
right?
Yep.
At least on the seams, right? Like the glue seams themselves are polyvinyl acetate, I assume. So it's like a form of plastic, essentially, right?
Yep.
And so
You put plastic in.
it's just, yeah, like basically on those seams and however far the glue diffused out from the seam, you've clogged those highways that normally move moisture with
Yep.
essentially plastic. So
And
I could
you might
see.
think, no big deal, right? There's still plenty of wood on there. Except, and this is my research, so you can send me your hate mail on this. So we looked at what role does finishes play? Because everyone who sells cutting boards will try and upsell you some sort of like conditioner thing that they have. You got to condition your wood. Your wood's got to look hydrated, which is ridiculous. Wet wood molds. You don't want hydrated wood. You got to keep it shiny because wood's supposed to be shiny. That one I don't get either. Something to put on it that you have to keep putting on it, so you'll keep buying it. But all those things do is they clog up your highway. And not only does it prevent you from moving the bacteria with the moisture, but our study actually found that a lot of all the finishes we tested, actually grow more bacteria. So it's staying on the surface where the conditions are good, and it's getting air and it's getting moisture because, the board's wet because you did wash it, and it's multiplying. And so finishes, linseed oil, mineral oil, all of those things, they actually grow more bacteria than if you just left it alone. And so, yeah, that's fun.
Is there any indication as to, say, how many washes it would take to remove that layer? Like, let's say you just put one layer of mineral oil on or whatever it is. How many uses and washes would it take to remove that layer enough to make it better?
I don't. Yeah, well, we haven't studied that. If you used a non-hardening oil like a mineral oil, it would probably eventually come off, right? One layer. Linseed oil is a hardening oil, so that's not coming off.
So I guess the reason I'm asking is like from the practical perspective of people making cutting boards and trying to sell them. I just think generally as a society are so used to seeing wood that has that traditional oil-based finish look to it, that when we see even like a water-based finish, we're like, something about that feels flat. It doesn't feel as pretty.
That's a wow factor.
Right. Yeah. So I think invariably, if you're trying to sell, if you're making cutting boards, hey guys, you heard it here. Seri said, don't put any goddamn finish on that board. That's the wide move. And I'm 100% for that. But for the folks who are thinking like, hey, I still have to sell cutting boards and people want to buy cutting boards with finish on it, like it sounds like mineral oil is the way to go.
I would say sand better.
Better.
Well, make it shinier through sanding, not burnish
you, and
just make it a little nicer looking, right?
So, sometimes the month is tight and I need a little extra cash, or my kid needs braces or something, and I'll make a slab cutting board or something like that, right?
How much are you selling a cutting board for that pays for braces? That big crazy. You're.
Oh no, yeah. My cutting boards aren't cheap. The best part is I make slab boards, and so they don't take a lot of work. But I tend to work with figured woods and lightly spalt, they're pretty, but they need to be shiny because people are used to them being shiny. But also,
right,
no one's buying a cutting board from me with a finish on it. Like, they know that. But if you I sand all my boards to 400 grit and then wet sand them, and they're perfectly shiny. Like, they glow, and that doesn't require a point of oil.
Yeah,
you could just. I think I said this on the Fine Woodworking podcast. It was just that you could just like up your woodworking game a little bit.
Sure, just be better.
Well, be better. You could be a better woodworker.
That's true. You also said put a finish on that's just not. It doesn't stay there very long. It comes off quickly.
Like a wax.
Well, wax. Yeah, that's what I was trying. Okay. Well, wax is better than mineral oil.
Yes.
Interesting.
But sanding is better than all of them.
Okay. So Seri, extrapolating on what you said about the effect of glue joints, like being sort of, interrupting the highway of absorption and being a place where, and finishes being a place where bacteria can just kind of sit on the surface where they're happy with moisture. How does this explain the FDA's recommendation to move to plastic cutting boards for so long?
I cannot speak for the FDA. I assume it's just for ease of cleaning, because you can put a plastic cutting board in the dishwasher and have it spray the bacteria all over the place, but get it off the cutting board But wood cutting board takes some care.
I
So if
recall,
you
yeah, I see that. Yeah. I recall a paper, if I don't remember whose lab it was, that showed that plastic cutting boards that are full of bacteria, if you put them in the dishwasher, the bacteria gets sprayed everywhere, all over the
everywhere.
things,
Yeah.
apparently. And they were able to show that. They were able to isolate some of the bacteria, which I thought was hilarious.
Cutting boards.
Yeah. Well,
So
so again, with
wood,
the trend of microplastics too, I've been all over that literature recently, and the idea of like cutting plastic up, making little divots that never heal, never go away, and are just these little niches for bacteria to grow, and you're putting them in the dishwasher, and then you're also consuming even more plastic than you do already involuntarily. It just plastic cutting boards never made sense to me.
it's constant. And with the thing is though, with wood, you do have to take care of them properly. So if you're like the solid slab is kind of the way to go, avoid the glue, all that stuff. But now you have, it can be hard to source a thick board because you don't want some wafer thin thing because it's going to warp on you, right? And so you want a nice thick piece of wood. And now you have to think about, people are used to like just really beating the crap out of their boards, right? Because they've been laminated up and they've oiled them so people could take care of them like they were plastic. But you can't do that with wood. You guys know, you're woodworkers, right? It has to have airflow on all four sides to dry. You can't just like wipe it down and put it in a cupboard. It's going to mold. You have to actually treat it as something that isn't plastic or ceramic. And I think that in a commercial kitchen, that's a hard thing.
That's a hard ask. Yeah. Okay. So, in a moment of truth telling and vulnerability, I will say, even though I knew the science of wood sucking, it in, I do have cutting boards that are glued. And I do think I used a finish on them originally, but that was years ago. So my guess is that's largely gone. So the question in my mind started to become, well, okay, let's say I did, they have glue ups. They do, right? They have plenty. They're plaid, actually. So they have a lot of glue lines going in each direction. And they're gorgeous, and I love them. And I'm going to have a hard time stopping to use them. So playing devil's advocate with myself about the bacteria counts, what I want to know, and I don't know if you have this answer or if there's data to even inform this answer. How big of a risk is this? How often does someone get sick from a bacteria off their home cutting board? I don't even know how to test it. I don't know what data would inform that.
Yeah,
do you know anything about that?
Because why? Like, how would people even go to that conclusion? It would have to be self-reported. And who's going to say it was my cutting board? And wouldn't they naturally say I bought bad meat? Or
how would they know?
That's fair.
There's no way to know about it.
Well, see, I haven't had food poisoning in the last ever that I can remember, at least 10 years. And pushback. That makes me feel like whatever I'm doing in the kitchen with my cutting board must be okay. I mean, none of us have had food poisoning that I can ever recall. So does that say that the risk is in a broad sense low? I mean, I know you're speaking from first principles. Like just a moment. Sorry. When people ask Seri questions, Sari's in a tough spot because they're asking her for recommendations. So she's going to go to they're going to go to best principles, right? They're going to say, this is what the science says about bacterial counts. And so I'm going to tell you what's best about bacterial counts. But what they can't tell you is, well, this is your actual real world risk, because it depends on your behaviors, how you treat that board, what you're buying,
your immune system,
how much bacteria was on it. Did you cross-contaminate? How much do you cook your stuff versus not cook? Because of course, cooking kills bacteria. So I feel like Seri's in a very tough, and this relates to some of the people who were contacting me, like angry about your previous answers. I'm like, they're in a very tough pickle because you're being asked to give advice based on first principle science without risk information at hand. So what do you do? Like, give me a break. I'm telling you what I know. I'm telling you the best answer I know. But how do we assess risk?
I always tell people, it's not my job to tell you what to do in the kitchen. It's my job to give you the tools you need to make your own decision. Like I'm not your dad. I'm your local wood scientist who works for a public university. I have given you this information and you can choose to do with it what you want. You can just ignore it. What I will say is that when you start thinking about, and I wrote an article about this, I think for like Oneida Blog Systems about consent in life, right? In woodworking in particular, right? Like, so what you do at your home with your own cutting board is your business. But if you have people over, and let's say one of them's immune compromised and you don't know that, one of them's elderly, one of them's a young child, one of them's something like that, maybe, and you cook steak and like you're fine with a little like E. coli because you're a grown adult with no health concerns. But maybe your 98-year-old grandma, doesn't have that same immune system and she's not consenting to, your potential contamination issue. She doesn't know. She hasn't consented to that risk. And so what your choice is, you can make those choices for yourself. But I think when you start talking about vulnerable populations, you have to take a step back and think like, how can I like protect those I love? But also, why are you fighting it? Is it such a big deal to just not put a finish on your cutting board? Like,
yeah,
is this one tiny thing where you spend less money?
Really? No. I see.
Like you got to kill grandma over this.
No, I mean, people are gonna get upset about that language, kill grandma, right? Because we just said on one side, we can't quantify the risk. It's just not quantifiable. There's no data. And on the other hand, you're saying, are we going to kill grandma? So I think people are struggle with the two sides of that thing. You don't know the risk. How can you say it's important about, people consenting and kill grandma when you can't quantify the risk? So I think that's why people get upset.
Mm-hmm.
Is it?
Can we go out on a limb and just say like, Seri is presenting information and what you do with that information is up to you. And if you take umbrage with what they're presenting, then don't fucking email them. Like, let's just establish that baseline right now, right? Like, it was cool.
Yeah, don't know the messenger.
I don't think that our listeners would do that, but I just want to put that out there.
You could just ignore me. It's really easy.
Right. That's the thing. Just be like, that's information that I don't feel like imparting in my day-to-day practice, and that's fine.
All right. So from a practical standpoint, Eric, have you ever had food poisoning at home that
not at home?
Recall? Okay.
No.
Me neither, and neither has my family. So in terms of risk, that's all I have to go on. So am I going to keep using my glued up cutting boards? Yes, I probably will. Do I believe the research on bacterial counts and the hygroscopic pulling down of bacteria off the surface? Absolutely. And I think the next cutting board I make, maybe I'll do it that way. So everyone has to make this risk, benefit cost calculation individually, but that's not Seri's job to do for you. Her job is to present the data, right, about how wood works and how bacteria move.
Can I ask kind of what might be an asinine question, but it's very much related to cutting boards, and I want to ask this question before we move on, because I know a lot of people have like butcher block countertops. I just bought some for my home that I'm going to install, in the next few months. Is there, obviously you can't pick up your countertop and put it in the sink and wash it off. So how do these principles differ when you're talking about a wooden counter? Because I do know people who are like, yeah, I'll cut shit up on my countertop. Of course I would.
Good question, Eric.
How does that change things when you're talking about a surface you can move to the sink and wash off versus taking a soapy sponge and wiping its surface down?
Well, the shorter answer is you could just get it wet if it's unfinished and move it down. But the longer answer is, I get this question a lot. Those countertops can't get adequate airflow on all sides. And so I've never tested one, right? I think that's probably going to be a case where you're just going to have to use finish, because I think you run the risk of your countertop molding potentially with the moisture moving down in and the airflow not happening underneath the cabinet. But then it also means that your countertop isn't like necessarily being antimicrobial, but you could also just wash it Like you could,
Right.
you know,
Right.
maybe don't put the steak directly on the counter.
So don't it's just fish on your countertop. All right, got it.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So one more question before we move on to cutting boards and allergies. For those woods that have very large pores, and I'm thinking about like red oak in particular comes to mind. Um, I've heard you say that they're fine in the past, but the question that always stuck out to me, and I didn't know how to answer it, was does food particles go into those large pores? And does the food rot in those large pores or decompose?
I haven't seen any science to suggest that it does. And there was a lot of testing done in a lot of those articles. And so at this point, I would assume that it probably breaks down and moves down in with the washing. Again, I haven't. I'm sure there are papers on it because that should be something that should have come up where someone was like, I rammed a bunch of bread into it to see what was going on.
Yeah, like some things are pasty and I mean, those
Like mashing garlic on those.
Yeah, those
like
pores are big. Those are big. I mean, food can certainly fit in them.
Does
right?
I can tell you that garlic and those kind of things, they do move down over time. It will get sucked down because people often are concerned about the smells or the staining. Like if I cut garlic on the board, well, is it going to smell? And if I cut blueberries on it, is it going to stain? And all of that stuff. It takes about 2 or 3 days. You wash it and then you let it sit. But it goes down. So over time, it will.
That was really interesting to me in that article that you mentioned the staining specifically because, like, I cook with a lot of different spices like turmeric and curry and things like that have that particular colorant stain. And I've never known why. I always assumed I was washing it off the surface, like after a week or so, that coloring would go away. But it's being drawn into the actual object, into the spoon and the cutting board. That's fascinating.
For the Fine Woodworking article, I just put a bunch of frozen blueberries on a cutting board, and I let it feel they stain worse than anything, and just stained it. And then, I took a picture of it every day, and day 7, it was gone.
That's wild. I love that. Okay, so now the next connected issue with cutting boards is, and what comes off them is extractives or parts of the wood that come in contact with your food and then become part of your food, and maybe you eat it, or maybe it goes in a pod and it dilutes away. It's hard to say. It depends on your behaviors, and that speaks to something. Actually, sorry, we didn't talk about this, but maybe we could just stop for a moment and give a caveat or how hard is it to paint the dangers or the concerns of wood with broad brushstrokes like we're trying to do? Can you speak to the challenge of that?
This is a really good conversation to have. So if you go into the literature, it's very specific and it's very nitpicky and it's very under this condition, this, and with this condition, this and this. And then when you need to communicate it to a broad audience, there's something that we call a rounding error that occurs. Wherein, if we're talking about, say, finishes on wood, different finishes and different wood species move bacteria at different rates. But no one, usually in a lay audience, wants me to sit there and go through, all right, so if you put 1 coat of linseed oil on red oak at this time, this is the bacteria count versus beech is at this one. Usually when these things happen, we do these broader things where we say, overall, every wood species was antibacterial. None of them sucked. Right? And if you go into the literature, then you'll be like, you could see, all right, wow, well, actually European beech did it better at this condition and oak did it better at this condition. So, but that's usually, it's so down in the weeds that scientists lose people if we start getting that nitty gritty. And so the idea always with communicating science is to give you enough that you can either say, okay, I'm good, or say that piqued my interest enough, I'm going to go find the paper and I want to read more. But if we blast you with every iteration of every test we ran, your eyes would glaze over.
Yeah.
So to know that anytime anyone's communicating science to a lay audience, they are rounding.
Yes.
This sounds to me like when I'm teaching a class in like, we all know that wood moves, right? It expands, it contracts. And then people are like, well, how much does wood move? It depends on so many different factors. The species, the cut of the tree, like all of those things. So in cabinetry, the general rule of thumb is 1/4 inch per 12. which is a fine rule. Like it works for 99% of the woods, but half the time you don't need that because that wood's only going to move a 16th of an inch because it's quarter sawn walnut or something like that. Or you get that one exotic, because that's a rule for domestics. You get that one exotic that wants to move twice as much as that. And then in 5 years, that cabinet blows apart and people are pissed at you because they're like, well, you said a quarter per 12.
And if you looked that movement up in like a wood anatomy textbook meant even just for undergraduates, we have huge tables that it's by species to subspecies. It's radial shrinkage, tangential shrinkage, longitudinal shrinkage, volumetric shrinkage at different moisture contents. And that's just for undergraduates. That's for like 20-year-olds.
That I have that sheet laminated in my shop. And it's one of those things where like I reference it because I want to know exactly how much the species is going to move. But again, I've shown that to students and they just go, I'm just going to go quarter by 12. Like, that's too much.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the quickest way to lose someone when you're trying to communicate information is to give them too much.
Okay. Well, we're not going to do that. But no, but I do feel like, sorry, you're in a tough position often being the communicator of science. And I know that because I'm in that position very often as well, especially.
Yeah. How did COVID go for you, buddy?
Yeah. COVID. As an immunologist, I had people contacting me left, right, and center about vaccine and risk. We're not going to talk about that, but let it be known, it was a lot dealing with that.
We should compare emails sometimes. I bet we could have a drinking to
that conversation.
Keywords.
Keyword number one. Fuck you. Okay. So, sorry.
What did you get? So-called scientist. I get that one in like every email.
No. I haven't had that. That's awesome. We're actually talking about how woodworkers react to this kind of information later in the show or in the after show, because Seri has some tasteful.
Yeah, I want to hear those bangers.
So
yeah.
Okay, so moving on to allergies. So, Seri, what, the exposure to an allergy from a woodworker usually takes place in the form of, I'm not that careful in the shop. I don't have a great tusk collection. I don't wear a mask. And I've noticed that my nose is starting to itch when I cut black walnut, or now I'm actually full on allergic. Can you kind of set the stage about wood and allergies for people who just don't know anything about it?
So just as a really broad discussion, so wood, if you stripped like everything out of wood that makes wood unique and just took it down to its base components, all wood would be the same color and the same weight and the same everything. So what differentiates different species and things like that, other than genetics, obviously, is going to be its extractives. And so that's stuff that the wood makes to protect itself. And we could go into all the science of it, but all you really need to know is if a wood has a smell, if it has a color, if it has a weird texture, like it's oily or it's sandy or something like that, that's all stuff the tree has made. Those are extractives. And they're there to protect it from things in the bacteria kingdom, the animal kingdom, and all of those kind of things. And so things that are in the animal kingdom include you, but it also includes insects. And so you may think, like, what do I have in common with like a wood boring beetle? That's ridiculous. Well, more than you might think. And so you actually have to, I mean, it's true. Yeah. So you have to think about if the tree's making these things to be toxic, right? Obviously, they're not going to kill you. Like what kills a beetle doesn't kill you, hopefully. But it does have an effect on you. And that effect may be allergy. It may be toxic in a different way. There's all different ways they affect you. And I know that people have a really hard time conceptualizing this, but it's interesting because I find that people don't have as hard a time conceptualizing it when we talk about animals. So everyone, I think, knows that you can't put horses on black walnut. Like black walnut shavings are a big problem for horses. Horses are giant mammals. Like let's just like contextualize that. If black walnut can take out a horse, now again, they're not us, but it's a good reason to be at least cautious, to ask questions.
Yeah, to even know, like, because we just assume mistakenly that wood is a natural substance and it's safe in every way, shape, and form. Never have to
Yep.
worry about wood. That's the safe way to go. But what you're saying is it's not quite. I mean, yes, it's in a broad sense, it tends to be safe for most people, but it's not unequivocally safe because each wood of what, I don't know, 10,000 species has different compounds in it, right?
Yep.
So, can you start by giving us an idea of what are some low risk, medium risk, and high risk woods that you know off the top of your hand? Could you categorize a few common things for us?
Low risk woods are going to be white woods with no odor, and like medium to low densities: aspen, cottonwood, maple, birch, beech, things like that. Oaks. A lot of sapwoods of a lot of species, kind of regardless, are pretty safe because sapwood isn't where the extractives are. Heartwood is darker than sapwood most of the time because of the extractives, right? Medium. It's hard to do the medium versus the hard. Like there aren't that many trees that will just flat out kill you. Like not everything is camphor.
Right. Tell us about camphor. Tell us.
Well, so there are a whole different class of woods that are either very fast sensitizers or can actually kill you. And so I've made lists before in different magazines and in books about like, there are some that, the extractives affect like sperm motility or there's lots of different things that everyone pays attention to that. You start talking about sperm motility and everyone's like, what wood is that? Stay away from that one. But you have to be careful of anything with a smell is usually not great for humans. So you have to be really careful on things like camphors or cedars and
bloodwood smells so good. Oh, I like my nose in by the sock because I love it.
So a lot of people think gasoline smells really good too, and
I am among those people, so I will die on that hill. So when we're talking about risk, I assume we're talking about the risk of exposure when cutting it, turning it into dust, inhaling it, etc. Correct?
Okay. Some way releasing extractives, however that may happen. And so that can happen, woodworking shop, sanding, cutting, milling. It can happen with
for the undereducated among us. Can you explain to me exactly what you mean by extractive? Like, I understand that you said that it's the thing that creates the smell, the color, et cetera, but what is that compound that I should be worried about?
It's a compound. There's so many different kinds. There's billions of kinds. So I can't just be like, it's a flavonoid. It's a silica. There's so many kinds. It's an extractive. They call it extractives because it can be extracted, right? So it's not bound to the wood. That's fair. That's the important thing. It can move with the air. Some of them move with air. Any of the aromatics move with air exposure. It can move with water. It can move with ethanol. So alcohols, things like that. There's lots of different ones, and some of them don't move in water, and some of them move with air, and some of them move with different kinds of alcohols, and some of them move better under heat. And so there's no real way to classify them other than that they can come out. And so, like, the reason that you make cedar chests, right, and the cedar's on the inside, is that so you can keep that smell concentrated, and then the cedar smell kills moths and things, which are insects, which are in the animal kingdom, which you also are. Yeah. And but you don't put them on the outside. Why? Well, because eventually the smell will go away because aromatic extractives are carried by the air. So unless you resanded it, right, you wouldn't get any more out. If you're cutting things, you get those extractives in the air, you get them on your skin when you're cutting, but you can wash them off. So like things like black walnut may be an issue for the woodworker, but a black walnut table is irrelevant, right? There's going to be a finish on it. Nobody's going to be licking it. Versus a black walnut, a cooking spoon.
I've got nieces and nephews. I don't,
Get in there. You use a cooking spoon, and then, you put it in a pot of pasta water that's hot, boiling water, and it's just pulling those extractives right out into the water, and then the pasta absorbs the water. And then,
at least the water soluble.
The water soluble.
Right? Some are water soluble and some are not. So
that's an interesting example. Is that a type of thing that lessens with time? Like, is there, like, if you carve a walnut spoon, is there X amount of extractives in there, and then by the 100th use, like you're not pulling any more extractives out.
There are a limited number of extractives, but it's not just going to be on the surface because wood is hygroscopic, as we've talked about. We're going to constantly be equilibrating and then pulling to the, because it happens at the surface, so it'll keep pulling them up. But yeah, eventually he's got one.
Food, right? It has to over time, right? Every time you dip that spoon, the water doesn't turn brown, right? Eventually the brown goes away. And so I guess you've liberated all the water soluble extractives you can from that spoon. And in that condition, would you consider it inert from an extractives point of view, at least without liberating new wood?
If you got them all out, yeah. So yeah, if you got great grandma's spoon.
So this is great because I have a Peruvian black walnut stirring spoon that I put in pasta and all kinds of stuff.
Damage is dodge. Move.
He's like, I've got a Cocobolo spoon that I eat every day with. So
let's see if a piece of camphor before I go to bed. Well, it helps me sleep. Knocks me around.
Before he came on, he just did a line of camphor real quick.
I know, I see lines of bloodwood right before I came on. So we talk about risk and the damage is done, right? What damage are we talking about? So we're going to take the safety component in two phases. The first is, do you have an allergy to it? Okay. And the second phase is there are other sorts of overt so allergy is your immune system reacting to in terms of an allergic response. Then there's just overt toxicity that is not necessarily involving the immune system and or cancer, right? So that's a different sort of chapter on wood safety. So
many options.
Yeah. So first let's take the allergy issue, because I think that's something is far more common and a lot of woodworkers experience. How common is wood allergy? Like, do you have a rough percent of 100 woodworkers? Roughly what percent do you think will develop a wood allergy? Do you have any idea?
All of them if given enough exposure.
So, but like sure. I mean, that's like cancer. If anyone lives long enough, 100% of us will get cancer. But in terms of like, okay, if you just take a swath of woodworkers out there and you test them with a skin prick test, what percent show allergies?
I don't think we can make that generalization though, right? Because I had allergies explained to me once as everyone's born with a cup inside them. And some people are born with really tiny cups and some people are born with really big cups. And you have a different cup for every potential thing you could be exposed to. And so if you're born with a tiny cup, maybe one exposure is all it takes to become allergic to something. And if you're born with a really big cup, 50 exposures is what it takes to become allergic to something. And we know that all woods are sensitizers, but you're so much less likely to get sensitized to something like maple because its extractives there's so few that it would take so much more exposure versus something like eastern red cedar, which is so filled with extractives that it takes far fewer exposures to get sensitized to it.
So it's a matter of what wood you're using, how many extractives are in it, your personal genetics, whether you tend to be sensitized to allergens, and then exposure. How much have you seen it, right? I did see a study where they just took a swath of woodworkers, and I don't know if this is generalizable, but the percent of those woodworkers and they gave them a test to the species they were working with. I think it was mostly softwood woodworkers, but they gave them skin prick tests to see if they were allergic to common woods. And it was like anywhere between 2 and 15% of them were showing up with an allergy, just like off the cuff, take a group, test. So, I'd say, I don't know if, 5%, 10% of people who have wood allergies. Now, I've noticed for myself, and I think, Seri, you're the opposite. I don't have allergies to pollen. I don't have any allergies. And I've only seen very, very mild sensitivity to black walnut dust. A little bit. It just is a tickle. And I've got to be really bad to notice it. Whereas, Seri, you're allergic to every wood dust. Is that right?
I have asthma, so every particulate bothers me. But I sensitize very easily. And so it usually only takes 3 or 4 exposures for me of anything with a high extractive compound for me to start breaking out hives and to start like having problems breathing. And it's not actually that uncommon. So I teach woodworking at the university and wood turning woodworking. We don't, like many shops, we do not allow tropicals in our spaces because they can get in, that dust is forever. So what I do is I have one class where we have 2 weeks of tropical woods work because I figure it's better. It's got to be like drinking, right? If you let them like experiment with supervision, they're less likely to sneak out and turn tropical woods behind my back. And it's a real issue because I've had to EpiPen myself from people having tropical wood.
Oh, way, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so what we do is we pick 2 weeks and everyone has to go on antihistamines. It's mandatory.
No.
And they come in and they work with them for 2 weeks. And so I would say usually a quarter of the students by the end of those 2 weeks are already showing signs of developing an issue. And it can be anything from whole body hives to a lot of eye infections, like pink eye puffiness, concentrated rashes. I make them, we take all the precautions, right? So I tell them I end class early. We use HEPA vacuums to clean up. And then I tell them you need to go. And we're wearing like full face shields, like masks, eyewear. And I tell them we're ending early. You are to go to the bathroom and you are to wash all your exposed skin and get everything off of it because you don't know and I'm not going to be the person responsible for sensitizing you. And in the end, it's still.
Well, a quarter. Like that's 25%. That is a sizable percentage.
Well,
I mean, right? Because if non-exotics are 2, 5, 10%, it doesn't surprise me at all that exotics could be significantly higher inducers of allergy.
It's also the context of being in a turning shop, right? Versus like in a furniture shop. If I take it to the table saw and I rip an edge, I'm kicking up a certain amount of dust. If I turn a blank of Coca-Cola, like I'm just bathing in the shit. So that's not surprising.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. So just a note about, as an immunologist, I feel like just for a moment, we'll talk about Seri's analogy that started this conversation with some people have a little cup and some people have a big cup.
That was a really good, helpful visual, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
So the question is, why do I not get allergies and why does the next person develop a sensitivity? And the answer, of course, assuming equal exposure, you could always say, different exposure, but let's assume that two people with equal exposure to the same thing, one gets allergies to the wood and one doesn't. Why? How can I explain that? There's two parts of your immune system that vary greatly person to person. The first part is presenting the allergen. Like your immune system has to present things. The cells have to present things to your immune system. And what I mean by present is they have to grab it and like hold it and like show it to your immune system. That's called antigen presentation. That varies so much person to person. Which part of the wood can be grabbed by your little cells and shown to the immune system? The hands are different people to people. So like one person might show this antigen to their immune system. The next person can't show that same antigen. What I mean by that is like molecular shape. The next person can't do that because they just don't have that particular ability to present that same shape. And so that is the first difference. And the second difference is, do you have the same immune cells that react to those shapes? So I'm talking about B and T cells for those of you who care. And so our B and T cells are very different person to person, and there's a random process to produce them. So that's also highly variable. So the ability to show the extractive or the thing you're allergic to, the ability to show it varies, and the ability to sense it is highly random and highly variable with genetics. So that explains like everything of why like one person will react and the other person will not.
So that being the case, how then, like, say I'm like I've been working with walnut forever and I've never had any kind of reaction to it.
Yep. Yeah. Are you going
to formulate? Right.
Are you going
like if I don't have the thing that holds the proper shape, nor the immune system that senses it, and yet we also know that given enough time and exposure, I will also develop an allergy. How does that? How does that work?
It depends is the answer. You may stay unreactive your whole life because the cells needed to sense it never come. But your immune system makes cells every day. Every day of your life, millions of new immune cells are born and millions of immune cells die. So your immune system's in flux. And so your immune system today is different than your immune system 10 years from now.
This is sounding like Russian roulette.
So they're rolling the dice, but do you know anyone who was not allergic to something and then they became allergic to it and then it went away?
Yeah.
Man, like
Sure.
allergy.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, no, because your immune system's constantly in flux. So Eric, for you and me, we don't have big allergies to walnut. We probably won't, but that's not guaranteed. It's
Sure.
possible they could develop. It just depends because it's a stochastic random process. There's no telling people the exact answer.
Stochastic might be my favorite word I've heard.
Okay.
Today.
So that's
think
just a
the best thing is I love it. I love it. Like it really doesn't matter. Like I'm allergic to everything. If it's in the air, my body hates it. But I can put on a respirator and be a perfectly functional woodworker without any issues.
So that's a good thing to bring up because we're talking about a lot of scary shit, right? We're talking about allergies. We're talking about to E. coli. We're talking about developing allergies, well into the future. And I think the majority of people listening to this podcast intend to work with wood in some capacity for the rest of their lives. There's a large variety of creative folk who listen, but I think the majority of them are woodworkers. So I think it's good to acknowledge, number one, there's a workaround. Like you can figure out a way to work safely. That's important. But how, I'm sure this is unquantifiable, but how worried do I actually have to be about developing a wood allergy or getting cancer from wood dust over a period of I'm 37. I'm going to be working. I'm reasonably confident I'm going to hit at least 92 because of my family genetics. So, I've got whatever that math is left over. How scared do I need to be that I'm in the shop 5 to 6 days a week making things out of wood?
Well, I can speak to the cancer risk and we'll go there next. But in terms of the allergy risk, I don't know, Sarah, you want to offer an opinion first?
And just mitigate your exposure. Put something on your face and you'll be fine.
So I have a different approach, Eric. I don't disagree with that. I have a different approach. I keep doing it. And if I start noticing some sensitivity, then I'll be super careful about that particular wood. That's kind of my, but go ahead.
How does a on-face respirator or overhead respirator versus really good dust collection, how does that change things?
It's a tough question.
The science I've seen, even point of generation dust collection is the best, right? You want something hooked up to your tool if at all possible, but it's never 100%. And the stuff it's missing is the stuff that hangs in the air for days. And it's the stuff that messes you up. And so you want to have something on your face too.
So when you say hangs in the air, sorry, I guess you mean those super small particles that weigh so little that they just kind of. Yeah. So I have a garage shop. So 9 months out of the year, I have the doors open. So I know all that fine stuff is gone for me almost all the time. In the winter, I still do open the doors every now and then. I guess you could mitigate that with some sort of really good HEPA dust collection system, I suppose. If allergies are a problem, if you don't have any semblance of allergies and you're not that worried about it and you tend not to have allergies, knock yourself out. But maybe if you see that it's starting, maybe you could be like, ooh, I better wear a respirator when I do black walnut. Or you know what I mean?
Can I just make one funny observation before we move on? I enjoy it quite a bit when people talk about dust control and dust safety, and they're very conscious about always wearing a mask, and they're machining things. And then as soon as they turn the machine off, they take the mask off, which even my idiot, ignorant brain is but the dangerous shit is in the air for the next 10 minutes. And that's the stuff you're breathing in.
It's in the shop for the next 3 days. If you don't really, yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Takes 3 days for it to settle.
Very good. All right. Sorry. Another question about allergies. And I thought about this from an immunologist point of view. So typically with pollen allergies, people love to get allergy shots. And the idea behind allergy shots is if I expose my immune system often enough to really small levels of the allergen, what happens is the immune system sees it all the time. It's just the allergen's there all the time, every day, all day. And the immune system starts to ignore it. It starts to think oh, this is just the wallpaper. I probably don't have to react to this anymore. And you build up immunotolerance. That's how allergy shots work. They're giving you what you're allergic to in tiny amounts over a really long period of time to stimulate tolerance to it, and
I'm
your
on my
allergies
third
go
year.
away.
I know them well.
That's awesome. And my wife induced tolerance to her pollen allergies through running. She started running every day, and just by sucking in all that air every day, she has cured her allergies. I kid you not. And I'm like, this has to be immunotolerance. Can that work for woodworkers who build up an allergy to, let's say, black walnut or something like that?
I don't know. I can tell you that they don't have any shots for it because I've asked. So,
But in theory, it's your work, right? I mean, not that you wouldn't try it. You might kill yourself.
That's what I was about to say. Like, are you suggesting somebody just like does a line of black?
No. The dose has to be so carefully controlled, or you go into anaphylactic shock and die. So don't try it. It has to be a minuscule trace amount, and it has to be tested. So don't try it.
That's what I was going to say. As someone who, again, is allergic to everything, the like amount, like the like trace, like I don't even think they were. It's just water. Like at one point they were like, we're not even sure. They had to dilute my first dose down so low. I failed allergy shots twice before they were able to do them on me because technology had to get to a place where they could dilute it down low enough that my body wouldn't react to it. So twice I failed them. And I remember them going, the second time I failed it, they were like, we're pretty certain we just put saline in you and you still had to be epied. And I was like, I don't know, that saline probably came across a piece of grass at some point and like kissed it. And that's what you put in me.
All right. So let's summarize. Sarah, you want to summarize your view on allergies and wood for us? Sort of close this chapter on allergies.
I think if you protect yourself when you're in the shop, you shouldn't even develop them. And that would, from someone who has terrible allergies, I come at this as I don't want to develop anymore. And so I'm not playing that game. I wear a mask every time I'm in my shop. And when I'm done with my woodworking for the day or the hour, whatever, I take a shower. And it's going to allow me to keep woodworking for the rest of my life. So the more you protect yourself, the less exposure you have, the less you have to deal with it.
Okay, great. One last piece before we move on to our next segment, which, and Eric, you asked this, is cancer development. What do we know about cancer development? So I spent quite a bit of time. I did a deep dive on cancer development with wood dust today. And hours, like I think I was reading for 5 or 6 hours today, trying to drill down to some sort of answer about this. And sorry, please, chime in with everything. So first of all, how likely are you to get cancer from wood dust? Okay. So I want to start by saying the IARC, or the International Agency for Research on Cancer, classifies wood dust as a group 1 carcinogen. Okay. Period. Right. What that means is that it's known to cause human cancer. Okay. So there must be some data out there. That's the starting point. And it turns out, if you look at all the different types of cancer, it turns out that the best data, or the most convincing data about wood dust and cancer, is nasal and sinus cancers, in particular adenocarcinoma. So that's like an adrenal cell in your nasal passage, in your sinus. It turns out that is far more likely, and the data is far more robust about that than lung cancer. Lung cancer is a very low association. So Eric, what if I told you your risk of getting nasal cancer is as high as maybe 50 times higher, 50, than someone not woodworking? How does that make you feel?
Very simply, I don't think there is anything that I could choose to do in my life that I would enjoy more than making things out of wood. So that is a risk I'm willing to take. Whatever.
Like
I would rather, you know what? It's exactly like bacon. I would rather eat bacon and make shit out of wood for 70 good years than live 100 miserable years.
You guys are going to love this. I have data on bacon. I do.
Teaser for this episode. I have data on bacon.
I do. So that sounds scary. What I want to point out is 50 times higher or 45 times higher. That sounds scary. In fact, it's dose dependent. Like a low exposure woodworker is 3 times higher, nasopharyngeal adenocarcinoma. Mid exposure is like 8 times higher. High exposure is anywhere from 16.
But what's the baseline?
Thank you. Thank you for saying that.
You don't have a PhD, but I'm not an idiot, okay?
Yes. So thank you for asking that, because what we're talking about is relative risk versus absolute risk. What I told you was your relative risk. You're 50 times more likely than a control. That's relative. But what's your absolute risk? Well, I looked that up too. What's the incidence of adenocarcinoma in your sinuses?
I've never even heard.
It's one person in every 2 million people.
I feel pretty good about being one people in 100 million or whatever the fuck it is then.
So even if you assume they found among high exposure woodworkers over long periods of time, let's say they had a 16x risk, 16-fold risk. That means if you do the math, which I did, that comes out to one person out of 120,000. When you multiply the relative risk times the absolute numbers. So the conclusion from that kind of study or that kind of data is that, number one, wood dust is a carcinogen. The cancer vector is reproducible statistically. It is statistically robust. There's no denying it. 100%. It does cause adenocarcinoma. But at what rate? It's sort of vanishingly small. Your risk is, say, 1 out of 120. Like out of 120,000 people who did high dust woodworking, one might have adenocarcinoma.
There are a lot of things and or people who are more likely to kill me.
So let's talk about bacon. So I'm like, oh, what's the risk of bacon? I mean, who doesn't want to know there's a risk for bacon? Okay, well, 2 strips of...
I want to be really clear. It doesn't matter what you tell me right now. I'm not going to stop eating bacon.
Okay. If you have 2 strips of bacon every day, daily, it sounds like you damn. If you have 2 strips of bacon every day, it adds an 18% relative risk of colon cancer. That's why bacon is considered a class 1 carcinogen. But now think about what you said, Eric. How many people get colon cancer? So if you look up colon cancer in your lifetime, what is out of 100 people in their entire life, let's say 80 years on average, or 85 years, or 97 for you, Eric, it's 4 people. It's 4.4%. So 4 people out of 100 in their entire life will get some form of colon cancer. Now, if you say, I'm going to add 18%.
Totally.
I'm going to add 18% to that. Well, that's 5.2, from 4.4 to 5.2. So out of 100 people, you take 2 groups. I have 100 people who don't eat bacon at all, and they have no fun in their life. And I have 100 people who eat bacon every day. The difference in colon cancer is the group who didn't like bacon was 4.4 got colon cancer in their life. And the group that did eat bacon every day was 5.2. And you tell me...
Eat the bacon.
Yeah,
the goddamn bacon. Make the thing out of walnut and eat the goddamn bacon.
Because people don't talk about absolute risk. It's a failure of the scientific communication. It is a failure.
Your headline with a
So, concluding about, I also have smoking and alcohol, but we'll skip that for now. Maybe we can cover it in the after show if you're curious. But anyway, the point is, adenocarcinoma has been shown for woodworking. The rates are vanishingly low. Most of it was in Europe. And the U.S., they did the same data from North America. They couldn't find any association. So, and then you're like, why? Was the U.S. already doing better with dust extraction? So, when that's the data I found. And there's a lot. I have all the references if anyone wants them. I don't think you have to be worrying yourself sick that you're going to get cancer. I mean, someone will, because it's robust and it's statistically significant, but we're talking vanishingly low probabilities. So please, don't make yourself sick over it.
But we have the negativity bias, like we'll know the one person who developed a severe walnut allergy and went anaphylactic shock or got cancer from breathing in wood dust. And that's the thing we internalized. And therefore we assume that woodworking is dangerous. And like, that's fine. If you want to wrap yourself in bubble wrap and live that life for the next 50 years, by all means. But, sounds like the three of us are going to eat bacon and make shit out of wood.
Please.
Do it. Yeah, sorry, please.
So I'm most of my outreach work is less with woodworkers, like what you use in the shop, because there's so many mitigations. You could just put a mask on, get some dust collection, like whatever. My what I always want to talk to people about, especially in terms of extractives, is just thinking about bodies, especially I really came into this because I had a kid and I started buying wood toys, and I was appalled by the number of like teething rings and stuff that I saw out of like Purple Heart and stuff like that. And so you just have to keep in mind that what won't have any effect more than likely in a grown adult is very different than what can affect a 2-month-old baby. Good. And so that's why there's all those extra protections for children's toys to begin with. And they don't regulate wood at all unless it has a finish on it. And so if you're trying to be like, the best uncle ever, and you want to make a teether, and then you're like, oh, but I know science, and so I want it to be antibacterial, so I'm not going to put a finish on it so the baby's like spit, doesn't grow any bacteria. But then you make it and they're like, I want to put any dyes on it, so I'm going to use a naturally colored wood. So I'm going to make it out of like Purple Heart and bloodwood and cocobolo.
Jesus.
And then it's being kneaded. It's like being abraded in a hot, wet environment. You just have to think about babies so little and like no ability to fight and deal with anything. So you just have to it's true that like you can mitigate exposure so much, but you got to think about where, who's going to be using it.
Yeah. I guess my only question to that is that because kids these days are too soft, or?
If you want to weed out the weak, that, if you have more grandkids, then you know what to do with. Yeah.
All right. So, Seri, my last question before we switch it up over to Eric for some WTB trivia. Are woodworkers in general open to the science of wood? What's your experience?
I would say, I think this is a complex question, honestly. I think that it depends who's telling them the science. Because I get far less pushback now that I'm older, now that there's gray in my hair. I'm clearly more professory than I was previously. And I will tell you that I think in general, yes. Like I would say like 85% probably yes across the board. If people just see my name in print and don't read anything about me, the comments tend to be, if they are not open to it, they're a lot less scathing if they think I'm a man. So, and that's really interesting to watch in forums, to watch how those pronouns track. And I've had male colleagues of mine deliver the same information and watch that people nod and agree. And then they versus me presenting it, which doesn't happen as much, I would say, in the past 7 or 8 years when I've got a lot of gray now at the temples. I haven't had that same. So I'm not even sure if it's sexism. I think it might just be ageism more than anything. Like you have to have a certain amount of age authority different message across. I will tell you that when I first started talking to woodworkers about science and wood, I want to say like 27, 28, and people would just leave. They would walk out of the room, or they would argue with me. Like they would just like start screaming at me in the middle of presentations, and that kind of stuff. And like obviously emails, but those still happen. And now I don't get anyone who challenges me directly to my face. Maybe I look more dangerous now. Now usually the questions are just, I'm just confused. Can you explain it? And I'm like, I would love to explain this to you.
When you get a scathing email, what are they scathing about exactly? Because I feel like you've done a nice job of communicate. Like, don't kill the messenger. I'm just communicating what the science says.
there's so many. I would say early on, I did a lot of education about fungi, and people are very, very weird about fungi. And I would get emails about, don't encourage people to use fungi. Don't encourage people to get, comfortable with fungi because fungi are really dangerous and really deadly, and someone's gonna get hurt.
You mean spalted wood when you say that?
Yeah, or just fungi, and like people had a really hard time like breaking up, like thinking it's a kingdom, and they were just like, well, fungus is bad. And I don't ever respond to these emails, just to be clear, because I'm not going to feed the fire on that. But it's really funny to sit there and go, I wonder if they've ever had blue cheese or ever needed like an antibiotic that was made out of penicillin. Like, it's a huge kingdom, and there's so much going on, so we can't just throw all the fungi under the bus. But there's that. There is a lot of, I would say, I wouldn't call it hate mail, but there's a lot of deeply dubious mail that I get that says, well, you say all this stuff, but what is it, like, what does it mean? Like, are you telling me with walnut? People think I'm coming for their walnut. Like, I think there are some people who honestly think that I'm going to show up at their door and take their walnut away from them. I don't care at all what you do in your home is entirely your problem.
Said in no uncertain terms, if you don't have a sensitivity to walnut, sniff lines of walnut. Who cares? But if you're sensitive, you're going to be sad. And I got a few messages from people on Instagram who are like, I'm sensitive to walnut now, and I'm really sad about it. And I was like, well, yeah, I get it. That's sad. I'm not. So, but,
so it's on a chef flavor. And then there's like, some people are just kind of out in left field, and I think just need someone to yell at. And
that's just, I can
somebody incredible emails.
As somebody who makes their primary living on the internet, I can tell you that people on the internet just want to fucking yell about the dumbest shit. And you're like, what, sir? And I can confidently say sir, because overwhelmingly it is men. What are you yelling? Like, who are upset at today? Like, what are we doing? Yeah. What are we doing?
I want everyone... Listen, I'm sure none of your listeners would ever write me hate mail, but should anyone who has previously written me hate mail be listening to this, I want you to know that I have a weekly chili night with my friends, and we do read your emails aloud.
This is amazing.
Absolutely fantastic time. It's a chili and cornbread discussing you.
Amazing. I love it. I love it. I have taken similarly, but on a public forum, I've taken to posting. I don't know what Threads is for, and I refuse to be on Twitter, but I've taken to posting like the shittiest comments from YouTube on Threads and just like letting people enjoy them, and it's quite entertaining.
I love Eric. I didn't know that. I have to read that.
You ever Google yourself? I Google myself, and I'm like, and I just read. It's incredible.
I do, or I did for a while. I'll listen, Seri, I'll tell you something very honest about myself, which is maybe a little bit exposing. When I started my business in whatever year it was, 2011, 2012, I wanted to buy ericcurtis.com, and the guy who owned it refused to sell it to me. And ever since that day, one of my primary goals in life has been to wipe him off the front Google page, the first page of Google. And I have successfully done that, so fuck that guy. So, that being said, our sponsor spot today is from none other than our good friend, William T. Burkle over at WTB Woodworking. And so I thought, in light of last week, Paul wanting to know more about what WTB Woodworking actually does instead of making a big joke about it, I thought that we could do a little quiz. I've got 5 questions here for you about things that WTB sells and or makes, and I thought we could just run through these. We got a multiple choice situation, so I'll feed you the question, I'll give you the potential answers, and you two can answer accordingly.
Oh, am I playing too?
We'll see who wins. Oh, absolutely. Okay.
Do I win something?
You win you could just tell Paul he's dumb.
Okay, I'll take it.
All right, so number 1, The lamello system, invented in 1955 by the Swiss company of the same name, is famous for creating what type of modern fastening method? A, the domino, B, the biscuit, C, the pocket hole, or D, when there's a little crack in the wood, so you rub some sawdust and wood glue in there and it invariably stains the surface, but it's okay because nobody has to know.
Am I allowed to Google it?
You know.
It's a quiz. Paul? Sarah?
I'm going to guess a biscuit.
I was also going to guess biscuit.
It is the biscuit. They invented the biscuit joiner in 1955. Okay. Number 2, the Temple Tool Company, maker of premium Japanese pole saws at affordable prices, was founded by what American YouTuber? A, East Coast Craftsman, B, West Coast Craftsman, C, North Coast Craftsman, or D, Third Coast Craftsman.
How about
I don't know.
Third Coast Craftsman, Chris?
It is Third Coast Craftsman. That's correct. All right. Number 3, WTB Woodworking sells not only tools, but lumber and sheet goods as well. So, Baltic birch, a ply well regarded for its quality due to, in part, its high number of laminations, has how many laminations in a 3/4 inch sheet?
And
A, 11, B, 12, C, 13, or D, 14?
I've got some right next door. I could just go count.
I don't know. Sarah, you guess first.
11.
13.
It is 13. Oh, it is 13. It was a good guess. That was a 50. I tried to give you the even numbers in there too, so it was a nod.
That was a total guess. I just got lucky.
Do you know how many times I have to ID plywood? It is a really common ID.
Billy, plywood in what way? Like the
individual plies, like peel them apart out of like a 2x2 inch square and ID the wood in a
really
3-cell wide.
Is that for a court case again, or what? Like how?
I do it for all kinds of things. A lot of court cases about illegal wood being used in the industry.
This is fascinating. I need to know more about wood science in murder cases. All right, we've got 2 more. Number 4. While we often think of fruit woods like cherry and pear as sustainable materials for woodworking, a number of nut trees are also used in fine furniture. Which of these is not a type of nut tree typically used in furniture? A, walnut, B, hickory, C, oak, or D, hazelnut?
Hazelnut.
Yeah, right. It is hazelnut. I have to admit that I formulated that question so I could make the joke D's nuts, but then I decided that would be more professional than that, so I went with hazelnut. All right, last one. Number 5. Chill Epoxy, a company carried by WTB, makes their Chill Mica powder pigments, which in my opinion have some very odd names. So which of these is a very real pigment color sold at WTB Woodworking? A, the Smoking Puppet. B, the Spring Break Regrets. C, the Smashed Eggplant. Or D, of the Dirty Dog.
What? I mean, Salty Dog is the color of my house. So
You're going dog. I'm going eggplant. What do you got, Eric?
Is that your final answer, Sari?
Yes.
They are all very real names of colors. Oh, Lisa, way. Yeah. Spring Regrets is my favorite one, I think.
Is that like a puce color? Like what?
I honestly, I couldn't tell you. I just saw the name and I was like, that's amazing and terrible.
The only one of these type of games I've ever been good at is there was a Porn Star or My Little Pony. Guess the name.
And I know we're doing it for the next ad read now.
I love My Little Pony, and it was great.
Okay.
That's amazing.
Hey, that could have gone many different ways. Okay. So now we're going to do a little Q&A because we asked you guys about questions. And so we're going to go rather quickly through the Q&A before moving to the after show. Ready? Okay.
I'm sorry. Ready.
I'd like I'd like to know more about the chemistry of wood aging, meaning like the chemistry of how cherry darkens or how purple heart turns brown. Can you tell me more about that process?
It's called oxidation. Wood in contact with air, things happen. In particular, extractives oxidize. And so those colors that you're talking about, all wood has extractives, but we use prettier woods, right, for furniture because they're pretty. Well, cherry is a red color, and that's an extractive, and the purple in Purple Heart is an extractive, and they oxidize over time. So just contact with the air, there's nothing you can do about it, right? You can put finishes on it to slow it down, but you can't stop it. And so Purple Heart, that pigment is not light stable, and it's not air stable, and it oxidizes to brown. It will do faster in light. And cherry is the same. It oxidizes, and eventually cherry does turn brown over time. Tree pigments they're produced by the tree to be inside the tree.
Yeah.
And they don't need to be stable in lighter air. And so when you expose them, they go through a natural process.
God, I love that. That is a really good point. Can I ask an ignorant question? Because I know I refer to the change in color as oxidation, whether that's due to like an oxygen in the air or light exposure, because in my dumb furniture maker brain, like they're the same thing. But like cherry will age faster in direct sunlight. So are they the same thing? And we're just grouping them together?
Seri, let me guess, and you tell me if I'm right. The sunlight raises the temperature, which favors a faster chemical reaction, so it oxidizes more quickly. That's my guess.
I'm sure that's happening, but it's not the primary factor.
Okay, go ahead.
UV light degrades the lignin, and it grays it, and that's why your decks turn gray. There's nothing wrong with the wood, right? Like a gray deck is still probably a perfectly fine wood, but it grays because of UV, and that affects how the lignin is. And so then that graying affects how you visualize the color.
Interesting. Okay, so they are very different processes. I just assumed that they were one and the same.
Well, does the sunlight speed up, like in the case of
So
in
for
the
example,
cherry, right?
If you take cherry, like the common problem of like cherry plywood with a quarter on it, right? So where the quarter is, by the time you get home and the cherry plywood is in the back of the truck, it will be a different color than where that quarter was. So it has to speed it up in some capacity, right?
Well, the light, again, that's the UV degradation.
It's the
happening as well.
Okay. All right.
And that leads to faster oxidation. That degradation somehow enables the oxidation to proceed faster.
Well, part of it's the graying, right? So it's like physically changing the color of the wood.
Interesting.
I am 100% certain it is also dealing with the oxidation, but that's getting into a section of wood chemistry that I am not qualified to talk about.
Great saying. That was so good. I love what you said about like wood's concerned about being on the inside of the tree.
Yeah, that's a great point.
It's a great point. Yeah.
Wood is not trying to grow itself for furniture. It doesn't care about you.
Nor is a pig trying to become bacon, and yet here we are.
And so relative risk is only 18%. Okay.
Listen, if you guys ever have me back on this show, because you get not enough hate mail and you want more, I think we should all come into it with a plate of bacon, and we could just be like violently
100%
as we talk.
And I will have it on a plate of Coca Bolo just to see what happens.
All right. Question 2. Milk paint. Can we add milk paint safety to the discussion? Is milk paint safe?
I am not a chemist. I am not qualified to answer this question.
I did look up what milk paint is made of, and it seems like it's made of casein, which is milk protein, lime, and natural pigments. They say it's non-toxic, environmentally friendly, but they say that a lot. So, I mean,
all I know is that I'm friends with a lot of toy makers, a lot of natural toy makers, and it passes the safety testing. They make it themselves, though, so they have to get their formula. They have to send out their formulations for testing, and it passes. But so do a lot of things. So, again, I am not a chemist.
Regarding making it yourself, I make my shellac myself because I take shellac flake and I dissolve it in Everclear grain alcohol, which is just methanol meant for ethanol with +5. It's 95% ethanol and 5%, I don't know, maybe water.
Everyone who's gone to college knows what Everclear is.
Yes. So I do that because I know that if you just buy shellac at the store, it's usually in denatured, some form of denatured alcohol. And what denatured means is very loose. It can be methanol. It can have other nasty organics. And I don't really want to be spraying that or using that. So that's why I make it myself. So it sounds like with your milk paint buddies, they know that what I put in is this, and therefore I know the safety of it.
Can I just make one point about milk paint specifically, but natural pigments as a whole? Like we say that and like, that's great. That's wonderful. The reason that milk paint red, like barn red, is a thing was because when they were using milk paint to seal the outside of barns have a lot of rusty tools in there, and the rust prevents mold from growing on the wood. So barn red came from literally banging off dried rust into milk paint and mixing it in as a pigment. And we all know what rust does when you inhale what's going on there. So just a note, like natural pigment's great, but also rust will fuck you up. So
natural doesn't mean safe in every context. Okay.
If it did, you should just go, lick some poison ivy and see how well that.
We go. Next, I have developed wood allergies over time. It's honestly really awful, and I've considered giving up on woodworking because of it. It's not a question,
Sorry.
It's just a comment, but I thought it bared reading. I feel bad for that person. Sorry about that.
I want a person, if you're listening, I am allergic to everything under the sun, and I can still woodwork. What I have done is ever since I started developing the allergies, right, I have a professionally fitted, we have a OSHA group at the university. I have a professionally fitted mask. I make sure to shower when I'm done woodworking, and all of my stuff as point of collection. And as much as it pains me to do this, Festool type stuff, because it's got those great vacuums and everything hooks up to it, it's so expensive. But I've tested it on myself. I'm a canary coal mine. I have sanded with their sander and their dust collector hooked up to it without a mask on, which with any other sander would have me looking like a pufferfish within 5 minutes. And after 5 minutes with that, I was the tiniest bit itchy. And so it's incredible. You can do it. It may just cost more.
And go ahead. I was just going to say, I will die on this hill. Festool's dust collection is better than anybody else's out there. And I've said that anecdotally, but that's proof of what you're saying. Is you can actually woodwork with it, with the HEPA filters attached.
I do want to say this isn't all or nothing. Everyone's always looking for a recommendation. What do I do? It depends on where you are. I think Seri's on the more careful end of what I've heard, and I'm kind of in the middle. I definitely have HEPA stack on. I have point of collection on everything. A huge HEPA stack coming off my Cyclone, and I have a HEPA filter on my shop vac that I always attach to my sander when sanding. I open the doors to allow the fine particulate out, but I don't wear a mask that often. Only if I know I'm doing something really bad. So that's an example of okay, my allergy risk is much lower. And has been for 20 years. I think, the cat's out of the bag. I'm not particularly sensitizable. So I take, some steps that are easy, but it's, you don't have to always go whole hog if you're not sensitive, but you'll be sad if you're not sensitive and you don't take some very simple steps and you become sensitive. That would be a real tragedy.
Can I ask, in this vein, for this person, I was wondering how wood dust versus, say, hand tool work changes if you're planing and using chisels versus using saws and sanders. Is not a thing?
I personally have no issue until there's fine particulate. So I can chisel all day, but you start getting into fine Japanese hand saws and that lower level dust. The finer the dust, the more it irritates me personally.
Sir, you're a good example case. How about hand planing? Does that get you?
I have no issues with hand planing at all.
Amazing.
Yeah, even I will say, even hand sanding with 80 grit, just a little bit of that usually is not enough to set me off because the particulates are so large.
Gary, you're like a measurement tool. You're like a fine desk measurement tool.
That's really incredible. So, like, I mean, we all know that like a hand tool shop has less dust, but it's really interesting that you being allergic to basically all the woods, you can sit there and hand plane all day and not a problem. So there for somebody like this person, there's hope. You just might have to come at it from a different angle.
It sucks for my students because I could tell if they haven't had the likes, if they haven't, because they don't want to hook the vacuums up to the sanders because they're 19 and the world is their oyster. And I'll come into the shop and I can come in the next day and go, who didn't use the vacuum? Thanks to you, we aren't having class today because I can't be in here. So, well done.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Wow. Okay, next question. It's not easy to put on a respirator for a little task here or a little task there. I'm a hobbyist, so I'm not woodworking 40 plus hours a week. Am I unnecessarily increasing my cancer risk? I would say, based on the data reviewed today, probably not. You're low exposure and the absolute risk is very low. I mean, yes, in some small, minute way, you probably are. But it's so minute, I wouldn't worry. You're pretty low head about it.
Related to that question, I will sometimes forego a mask doing something like I power carve quite a bit. And if I'm power carving for a long time, of course I'll wear a mask. But if I'm doing 3 minutes of work, I might not put one on because I could be speaking out of pure ignorance here. But the point of the mask is to filter out the fine dust particulate. And because of this stupid fucking thing I have on my face, the mask never seals. Is that a real, that has to be a real, like, quantifiable difference, right?
That's one of the questions too, Eric. That's another person asked the beard question. Go ahead, Brett.
Okay, we can get
You guys, my university has a beard chart they send us before we do our testing. And they label all the different types of beers and that which ones you can have and which ones you can't have. So they gave them names like the pirate, the villain, all the different which ones will interfere with the mask. And they send you this chart before you get tested, and they're like, these 10 are fine, these 10 are not. And then the villain, I just want you to know, says it depends. Like, someone had a really good time making this chart.
That's the pirate, please. Okay.
Okay, so it does make an actual difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
Breaks the seal. It's like N95. Yeah. Same with hospitals and COVID and N95. Any facial hair breaks that seal.
Yeah.
What are the top? Okay, this one, sir, you're gonna love. What are the top recommended food safe finishes? So, okay, what they mean is that the thing I'm putting on the board is not going to hurt me. Like, the substance, the oil is not toxic to me, but you have a different view on what food safe means, right? Which is allow the wood to be hygroscopic.
Yeah, so I don't think you should put any finish on wood, but let's take it at its face value what finishes are
non-toxic.
So there's like two answers to this. And the first one is they wouldn't pass safety regulations to be like a consumer finish if they weren't safe when cured, right? So they all have to go through that testing. So in theory, they're all, when cured, not dry, cured, they're all safe. But now we all care about plastics, right? And microplastics and things like that. And a lot of finishes are just a thin plastic layer. Yeah. And so you are putting something that could give you microplastics now in touch with something that will be in touch with food. And a lot of those finishes, like, we know that plastics leach, right? They leach chemicals. We know they leach it more when they're hot. We know they leach it more in contact with water. Like, there was that old new study that came out about water bottles. And even when it's not hot, just like the water being in the water bottle, you're leaching plastic, whatever, goo.
There's 100,000 plastic nanoparticles per water bottle. Put that in your.
So you're
100,000 per bottle.
Putting that on your wood in some instances, and then you're going to eat out of it.
Yeah, not into that.
And so you have to then think, okay, so if let's pretend that the antimicrobial nature of wood does not exist, and you have to put a finish on it. If you were going to do that, I think you would want to be looking at natural oils that have some sort of solvent to help them dry. And so, yes, obviously the solvent is toxic if you sniff it, but after it, the thing cures and the solvent flashes off into the air, and then the end user has this hardened like linseed oil, which, you can get food grade linseed oil, and it's fine. And you could do it without the solvents. You could just use raw linseed oil on your wood, but it could take over a year to cure, and it reeks when it's curing. And a lot of people find that smell quite offensive. So there's like you have to think about it. Do you care about plastics? Like, if you don't care about plastics, then shove a polyacrylic on there and live your life.
Well, I mean, probably
Just laminate that bitch.
No, speaking about risk, the amount of plastic coming off that cutting board is probably a drop in the ocean of what you're exposed to from other routes. But I mean, why add to it? Okay. To follow up on the answer about the drying oil, one of the oils that's popular that I've used is Osmo Top Oil. It's been certified as food safe by the German equivalent of the FDA, and it's exactly what Sari said. It's a bunch of food safe oils and waxes in odorless mineral spirits that flashes off completely. How do I know that? Because I looked into whether odorless mineral spirits actually leaves a residue of any form when it flashes off. It does not. So all you're left with is like a highly polymerized, food safe oil and wax. And the same is true for shellac. Shellac is made by bugs, like the lac beetle. And if you dissolve it in Everclear, the solvent is non-toxic. Well, ethanol's toxic, but at least relatively non-toxic. And so those are two very common reasons. And I guess, pharmaceutical grade mineral oil, Mineral oil, by the way, is many different things. It's made by a petroleum distillate usually. And it's very, very variable. Which fraction is it? Which distillates are in there? So I always go for pharmaceutical grade because I assume that's the clearest. But something like one of those three would be, I guess, But I like the first answer. Why don't you leave it, don't worry about it finish. Let the wood.
The wood is already fine. Think about, even if you disagree about the finishes in general, everything's expensive now. Think about it as a cost saving measure. You don't need to put anything on your cutting boards. So I just saved you like what, $20? And time, you can charge the same amount, but you put less time in. I've raised your profit margin.
See, I love that you know how to sell it to these people too, because you can't just be like, don't put finish on wood. You have to be like, no, it's going to save you money. It's going to save you time.
Listen,
that's wisdom right there.
I teach woodworking to college students. I love my students dearly, but do you know the kind of student that takes woodworking in university? They're the kind of students who I very lovingly call them my don't tell me what to do students. And so I am aware that the woodworking population is not a population that is real good with sitting down and doing what they're told. So instead, let's talk about how you can make more money by doing less work.
Fantastic. How about sealing off your shop from your house? Is that a big... There's a question about that. It's about half a page long. I'm not reading it. How important is it to seal off your shop from fine particulate from your house? Oh, pretty important, yeah.
Yeah. You would not you would woodwork in your bedroom. Although I've done that. It's a bad idea. It doesn't wing your eyes. I'm just going to put that out there.
You probably don't want your kids exposed to it all the time, right? So I guess, yeah, you should probably do your best to try and, okay.
You don't like a my garage shop, I have a door, that door works.
Yeah. So it doesn't have to be like crazy. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Maybe don't live in the shop, I think.
Yeah.
Does wood baking, does kiln drying or caramelizing, what do they call that? There's a word for that when they overheat it. Roasted maple. Does that alleviate any of the allergies or toxicities of extractive wood?
Absolutely not.
In fact, I saw a paper that said it made them worse. The wood was more apt to disintegrate into little particles because you've destroyed more of its structure by overheating it. Is that, that squares?
Interesting.
How about wood burning, like pyrography? Does that carry any considerations or concerns?
You are flashing off some extractives when you do that. So, don't do it on something that maybe you're concerned about the extractives, but it's going to be different kinds of extractives that come up with heat versus water. And so it's so little with pyrography. Like now you're in Europe, you probably aren't having a toddler do pyrography. So my concerns now about toxicity are evaporating along with the smoke. It's so little. And you're doing it usually for, it's like a little thing of smoke. If you eat smoked meats, I would argue that your exposure to carcinogens and wood smoke is already plenty. Like the little pyrography is not doing anything on top of that that you aren't getting from like smoking meats.
Okay, all right, last two answer. What is the most popular species that people use that is of most concern in your opinion?
Purple heart. Say purple heart, please. Just say purple leaf walnut.
It's probably purple heart.
Goddamn right it is, Buck.
It's probably purple heart. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit why.
It's because I see it in teething toys over and over and over again.
You weren't being anecdotal about that? You're being dead ass serious?
No. It's commercially available. People can get it, and it's a beautiful color. And I have seen it far too often in like little grippy teething toys and rattles. And in glue ups particularly, there's always like a purple heart, bloodwood, maple. It's a really common trifecta. And it's, again, I don't care what you do as a grown adult at all, but I do care what you give to babies. And when, usually it's just like a doting grandparent who like has lovingly made this thing. And it's like purple heart. It's always fucking purple heart for some reason. It's my
There's one thing we know. Yeah. If there's one thing we know about young woodworkers is it's always fucking purple heart for some reason.
It's the first thing they ask me, hey, when's Tropical Woods Week and are we going to get to use purple heart? And I'm like, I don't fucking want to have this conversation. Stop it.
Oh, Seri, just to finish your answer, what's the risk to the child that they'll develop an allergy very early to this?
There are a lot of those beautiful tropical woods have water soluble extractives in them. And so again, I've got charts like you can look up and
right,
there's a lot of actual data on it, but ingestion in a small body is a concern.
But is it concern because of toxicity or allergies or both?
Toxicity. Like actual ingestion toxicity.
Okay. So there are extractives that just don't, it has nothing to do with the immune system and allergies. It's just
there are some that can actually affect a mammal, larger mammals.
Okay, good to know. And last question, and I think this is a great way to end because you are Dr. Spalted. What about using spalted material for cutting boards? Are spalted woods safe for humans?
I love this. I have tested spalted wood over and over and over again. Do you know how many zebrafish we haven't killed testing spalted wood? Spalted wood, from everything that we have tested, now I'm sure there's some out there that we haven't tested, is utterly and completely benign. I still would not necessarily recommend highly spalted wood for cutting boards because it's very soft and I think your knife will just go through into your countertop. But man, let me tell you, nothing beats a nice piece of figured wood with some like light to medium spalting on it. Ooh, sanded to 400 grit.
I love it.
That is some of the nicest stuff you can get.
I love your passion for it. Does the degradation that occurs with heavy spalting, it gets punky, that's I guess the word we like to use. Does that lead to a change in anything about the bacteria or food getting in there? Does that change any of that equation?
It'll make the wood more porous. It'll move water faster in certain areas. And I would say if it gets real spalted, you could see things just kind of shoot all the way through down to the bottom and not stay in the wood. So you've really got to watch the white rot component.
All right. So you don't want it like punky to the point that it's like degraded, like structurally.
If it's a sponge, it shouldn't be a cutting board.
Okay.
But like all my cutting boards are salted. And
a good rule of thumb.
Like, it can be clearly white, right? You can have some of that white rot, but you wouldn't want to be, if you can like chip it out with your fingernail, it's too soft.
Great. Well, folks, our longest episode ever
without a doubt. Yeah.
But this was so important to do, I think. Sorry, your amazing. The breadth of knowledge you brought, the clear-cut answers, the ability to round decimals, to give really great answers to these things. Thank you so much.
Oh, you guys were awesome. This was fun.
This is fantastic.
Next time,
Thank you.
bacon.
Next time, we're all sitting around when we come out to Oregon at some point. We're going to sit around and play the bacon together. And that's when we're going to do this.
Yeah, I just, again, appreciate it's rare to have so much dedicated time from such a learned professor. Thanks again. And anyone who wants more, we're going to be talking more in the after show. You know how to get that. Just subscribe to our Patreon and we'll see you there. Thanks again, everyone.
Amazing. Thanks, friends. Bye.
Bye.